Well, great to see a full house today. We are in Exodus chapter 20, and this is the Ten Commandments chapter. So you are here for a good one. We're gonna go through the text and answer maybe a lot of questions you have to the best of our ability. And for that introduction, let's go right into it. Who would like to be our reader? Moses is, and the people are listening to the Lord. Wayne, go for it.
Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out from the land of Egypt where you were slaves. You shall have no other gods beside me. You shall not make any carved image for yourself, or a likeness of anything in heaven above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. Do not bow down to them, or be subservient to them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. I follow up on the guilt of the fathers with their children, their grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren if they also hate me. But I show mercy to thousands who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not permit anyone who misuses his name to escape unpunished. Remember the Sabbath day by setting it apart as holy. 6 days you are to serve and do all your regular work, but the seventh day shall be a Sabbath rest to the Lord your God. Do not do any regular work, neither you, nor your sons or daughters, nor your male or female servants, nor your cattle, nor the alien who is residing inside your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. In this way the Lord blessed the seventh day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother so that you may spend many days on the land that the Lord your God is giving to you. You shall not commit murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his male servant, his female servant, his ox, his donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Want me to keep going?
Yeah, finish up to 21.
All the people saw and heard the thunder and the lightning and the sound of the ram's horn and the mountain smoking. The people saw and they trembled and stood far away. Then they said to Moses, Speak with us yourself and we will listen, but do not let God speak with us or we will die. Moses said to the people, Do not be afraid, for God has come to test you, so that you may always fear him, so that you do not sin. The people stayed at a distance, but Moses approached the thick darkness where God lives.
Thank you, Wayne. So, verse 1. And God spoke all these words. So the Ten Commandments are called words. This is in distinction to the laws, which follow in Exodus chapter 21. The words were a general summary of God's will, which the law applied to specific problems and conditions in Israel. The two together form the Book of the Covenant. God also wrote the 10 words on 2 stone tablets. The numbering and arrangement of the 10 Commandments is not indicated. There are 11 you shalls, and we know there are 10 commandments. Some churches divide them differently by making the first 2 you shalls into 2 commandments and combining the last 2 into 1. So some people split idols off from no other gods. We don't do that. We put those together while we split the 9th and 10th, right? You shall not covet your neighbor's house and wife and then neighbor's stuff. The 3rd and 4th commandments contain some elements of the laws God gave only to Israel. The Sabbath law was a ceremonial law. The promise that the Israelites would live long in the land if they kept the fourth commandment was also spoken to them. For they were the only ones who were promised the land. However, note Ephesians 6:3, where Paul quotes from Exodus chapter 20 and replaces in the land with on the earth. So, you'll enjoy a long life on the earth. Paul would tweak that. So, your questions are always just as interesting as mine. Anything burning on your heart or mind as we read those commandments? Yeah, sure.
I guess this was, at least I was enlightened. I read this last night. I never saw that the Ten Commandments, there were words. And then the laws are what came later because, all my life I just referred to the Ten Commandments as the law. But the word has for me, a little different connotation or approach. And then God built on those for the exact that we have in the rest of Exodus.
Yeah.
But I never saw that before.
Yeah, can we frame it in a sense like we have the Constitution, and then we have a bunch of laws that start figuring that out, right? How do you apply that all men are created equal? How do you apply freedom of speech, right? And it seems like that's what we have here. God says these are the commands, these are the ordinances you are to follow, and then He's going to break down, some of these specific commands, like the Sabbath law, very specifically. But you do think about Moses giving us the law, and he's the lawgiver, and he's always pictured with the Ten Commandments, and the Ten Commandments are the foundation of the law, really. But it's not how God presented them, right? And I think that helps us too. Like these commands are really and we'll talk about that in a question soon. Like they are to protect things, right? They protect marriage. They protect God's name. They protect property. And in that way, they're not as legalistic in that sense. Right? They shouldn't be seen as like, boy, this is really going out of my way to do this for you. These are. We oftentimes would say there's ceremonial laws with the third commandment, but we have moral laws here. These are the morals that they are to follow. Al, thought?
You always read about how generation after generation, in God's commandment, He said, if you don't follow me, it's not just you, it's going to be your grandchildren, it's going to be, you might as well kiss her goodbye because He's going to just hammer them. And, I think that's where some of our, groups of society, they're not blessed.
So, to that point, I would often get the question about the unevangelized, right? What about those people that haven't had a preacher or the gospel to them? And I would quote this as an example of, well, when the Lord is forsaken and such, generations later suffer for it, and I think our human American nature would say it's not fair. But on the other hand, God is fair. God did work with everybody's ancestors, and maybe it's too simplified to say everybody that came off the ark was a believer. But at some point, right, God has spread His gospel throughout the whole earth, even then through His apostles and such. I also note with that though, like you see a limit to this, right? You see at least there's 3 to 4 generations of those who hate me, and I think the People's Bible did a good job of talking about hate me, I think, when we think of hate, we think of like, I'm never going back to that restaurant again. I'm going to write a bad review on Google. I hate it. When we read the word hate here and love, I think we need to see it as a display of people following the commands. So people that hate hate God, there's no dime's worth of difference. They also don't follow His commands, right? They're going to steal. They're going to covet. They're going to murder. And those who love the Lord are going to follow His commands. So I think in our mind we might take it a different way with hate. I think this is just a statement more or less of you will by their fruits you will know them, right? By their behavior you will see if they think I'm the true God and these are my commands or not. But on the flip side, you have the third and fourth generations are punished. But those who love me, they're blessed for thousands of generations, right? And I think the EHV left out the word generations, but the NIV would say it's implied. It's third and fourth generation, and then 1,000. So again, the word thousand here, I would take symbolically to say as far as the eye can see, right? You can pass down these commands and the love of the Lord, and people are going to keep being blessed. So maybe not your question, maybe you didn't have a question, but it's an interesting thing, right? Like we start looking at that command and such. Wayne, another thought?
Yeah, I think that's a real strong qualifier in there at verse 5. If they also hate me. If they hate me, then that applies to them. But if their heart is changed because the Lord called them and they responded, that's different. I have a different question.
Yeah.
When I was, we've always had church on Sundays. When I was a kid too, also never anything Saturday. But there were rules about you couldn't do certain things on Sunday, like buy liquor or alcohol. You weren't supposed to do this or that, and they were called blue laws.
The blue laws,
And
yeah.
I was wondering where that came from. But sorry, that's just out of left field. Why were they called blue laws? I don't know. But they were fairly strict.
Anybody hear an explanation for blue laws?
Who's got Google?
Someone could Google it while we're in our lesson.
Wikipedia.
Everybody's got.
I don't know if I've come across why
I
they're
can
called
look
blue
quick.
laws. Yeah, Denise will look it up for us.
Sorry.
No. But that is an interesting thing though, like you're kind of piggybacking off this thought that there should be no vices, I suppose, right? That's I'm sure that's a very American teaching and philosophy. I think that stuff started with outside the Quakers or the Protestants in Pennsylvania.
I think it
Over.
really was in the East more, because when I was married so long ago, but when we lived in New York, we were right on the Mass border, and Massachusetts had blue laws up the Yingling. And that was like in the early 70s, 1970, 71. But by 76, they'd all disappeared. So we lived right there, like my grocery shopping was in Massachusetts. You couldn't do that on Sunday. There was things that were closed, and all of a sudden that just fell apart. But New York was different. I mean, anything went 24/7.
I think there was. I don't know if any of us would really be that upset if. There was like the whole you don't have your store open on Sunday, right?
Mhm.
Policy that that's
But
day people go to church, and now we barely get the holidays to have
Exactly.
things closed.
Exactly.
But Denise has found it.
So blue laws are laws that restrict or prohibit certain activities on specific days, usually Sunday. They are also known as Sunday closing laws, Sabbath laws, or uniform days to restrict laws. Blue laws originated in England and were brought to colonial America to promote Christian Sabbath. They were originally intended for religious reasons but have since come to serve secular purposes as well. Blue laws can include restricting shopping, banning the sale of certain items on specific days. The term blue law may come from Samuel A. Peters' General History of Connecticut, 1781, which was printed on blue paper. The word blue may also have been used in the 18th century to mean rigidly moral in a disparaging sense. The term is the Illuminated Blue Law. Some states still have them on their books.
Yeah, there was a little town in Nebraska where I read Vicar that didn't sell alcohol on Sunday.
Do we still have them here in Wisconsin against cars, selling automobiles on Sunday? They can't do that.
I think it's
Did you
more
know
so,
that?
yeah.
Go look for a car on Sunday, you can't find anything open.
Car dealerships can't be open.
Yeah, some places either Saturday or Sunday, then they can't be open.
I think some of that too is though because there's no banks open either.
No, that's true. Try to get a car loan on Sunday. I learned something too, Wayne. Thank you. Blue paper. Okay. Well, we'll have some more thoughts as I go along with you. Discuss. In which of the commandments does God protect our neighbor's property? So, I would say there's an asterisk with that. I mean,
Yeah,
your neighbor's
9 and
property and your thoughts.
9 and 10 too.
Seven is the specific stealing prohibition, right? Don't take.
Don't
I think the People's Bibles
Bible
talked about, like Luther even made a distinction between, well, I guess maybe I should say it in a little bit, but he made a distinction between, there's a different kind of coveting between a person and property. I was kind of interested by that, but I didn't dig too much further. But anyway, property, definitely 7 asterisks, yeah, 9 and 10. Definitely not saying your wife is property. I don't get that from here at all. But we do know from the New Testament the husband belongs to the wife and the wife belongs to the husband. So I guess you're mutual property, right? All right, what about number 2 there? His institution of marriage?
6.
Yeah, 6th commandment. Certainly the way we number them. If you hear evangelicals number them differently, that'd be number 7. Yeah, I could always be watching a show and they'll say, "Don't sin against the 7th commandment." And you're like, "What?" So that's why they split 1 and 2. So 6 becomes 7. Your neighbor's life.
5.
Protect his life with 5. Yeah, do not murder. Which is different than killing in different situations, right? So we could dive more into that if you'd like. When is it murder? When is it not murder? If it's killing. 5. God's holy name is protected in commandment. 2. I skipped over reputation though, didn't I? Our neighbor's reputation is 8. Yeah, false testimony. God's name is 2. Yeah, where does God protect himself as the only true God? The first commandment. Yeah. Maybe that's a good place to talk about verse 2. We have the preamble, really, don't we? I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Yeah. Any thoughts about the preamble? This is how God introduces himself with these words, the 10 words. Margaret?
Well, it certainly gives a setting and declares why he has the authority to speak this way to his people.
Yeah. Why didn't he say, I'm the God who created you and the universe? Because I think if I was writing this, I think I would have put that in there. What is he really doing?
Showing his authority.
Saying he's our deliverer.
Deliver, yeah, and I think it leads in really nice with the first commandment, right? There's no other God that would do this or has done anything like this, right? So you can already sense there's going to be a tension. Like these Israelites are going to certainly be introduced again to false gods, and this isn't going to be a problem that goes away. And they need to identify with me as the true God and as the one who did this for them. And that's certainly lacking with all the other gods that would be idols, right? You know, these idols speak through false prophets and divination and weird things, but they haven't really done anything. Right? People say these gods do stuff, right? This is the God that gave us a good harvest. This is the God that watched over us. But the Israelite God, the true God, showed it, right? He came to them and said, look what I did. And that's definitely not on the table with any other God that they're going to be tempted to serve. Joan? Yeah.
Well, I was thinking almost the same thought as you were saying. It was fresh in their mind that they saw for themselves the power of the Lord. And it was important to distinguish between him and the idols of Egypt and the other ones they're going to run into.
Yeah, is it always, culturally is in the back of their mind that, the Egyptians have their gods and we have our God and, kumbaya. And the Lord is trying to say, no, we don't do that, right? We don't have polytheism where we just have different gods for different peoples and such. Right? And he doesn't identify as, well, I'm the God the Egyptians worship, but this is my real name. That's kind of what people still try to say today, right? You worship Allah, you worship Jesus, you worship, whoever, and it's really the same person, you just give them different names. And God doesn't do that here with the Israelites, right? He doesn't say, I am all those gods. No, just me. That's all Wayne, and then I'll go to Margaret. Yeah.
Without saying it also foreshadows, I am the God who sends Jesus, your great deliverer. And the whole book is about Jesus, so I never thought of that.
Okay, so when God wants people to recognize him, he wants them to see him as a deliverer. It's kind of what you're saying. Like,
Yeah.
So instead of saying,
From
instead of knowing me as the God who made the awesome dinosaur or the giraffe or the huge sea, I want you to identify with me as the God who saves you, right? And so that's very, I'm not the God who can bench 500 pounds. Look at me. Look at the goodness he's done. Yeah, we appreciate that. Margaret, you had a thought?
Well, people nowadays refer to the higher power, a higher power, and our God is the highest power. He has power that no others have.
Yeah, and we can almost find fault with that, right? In the sense that if you're a Christian and your worship and such is really focusing on, well, he's just stronger than everybody else. He's so powerful and mighty, and you would say, well, that's true. Our God is an awesome God, but you need to connect that to salvation, right? So he's not just mighty to save us from hurricanes and from financial difficulties, but He's our eternal Savior. And again, that's really, I'm thinking of Jesus in our gospel lesson on Sunday. Don't celebrate that the demons submit to you. So rejoice that your names are written in heaven, right? So even the power that the disciples were given was not to be like the key thing of their relationship with God and their joy, but going to heaven. So, and I think that's a tricky thing because I think people, when they get sucked into this, they get sucked into that too far. You want all the qualities of God to be on display, right? You don't want to just His love to be second or third place to His salvation, second or third place to His power, and vice versa. So you try to keep all His qualities and characteristics on the same high level. At least the way it's kind of how I would think as a good Lutheran. Alan?
Is there any relationship, with the 10 plagues to the 10 commandments? I mean, God demonstrated in those 10 plagues that, the Israelites should have had in their memory. God wiped out all their gods, the Egyptian gods. I mean, He always was more powerful than that.
I have not heard of any good correlation, like the third commandment correlates to the third plague type of thought. But I would say 10 is one of our numbers of completion, and so it would seem to be a very strong reason for God to say smush a couple numbers together, because I don't want 11 or 9. If it was 9 or 11, it would seem strange for God, I suppose. So I think just by saying that, when you have 10 commandments, you're not expecting 12 and 13 to come along anytime soon. This is a completed list as far as that goes. And I guess he could have, leaked these out in drips and drabs, but they work as a unit, right? They're together. Good questions. Question 2: what impression did all this have on the Israelites? It kind of speaks more to the end of the commandments.
They were afraid.
Yeah.
But it was the thunder and the lightning, not the tablets of stone.
So interestingly enough, we don't have any tablets of stone yet, do we? So I'll circle back to that thought, because here's kind of where I think we don't have enough detail a little bit in some respects here of what's happening. But we know the reaction is some fear. I mean, and what is that? I think that's what God wants, right? That's why there's the smoke and the thunder and the lightning. Why is that? Why is that the emotion he's invoking here? I mean, he could have put a rainbow in the sky, right? He could have cleared the clouds. I mean, it could have been like a Noah type moment. I mean, he had that option.
How many times, to answer your question, or maybe not quite the answer, how many times in the past with the Israelites have they failed? And reverted back to things that weren't godly. They knew what they were supposed to do, even without the 10 Commandments. But yet, they ended up in situations because they just didn't follow.
Yeah.
They went away from God.
So their track record right now hasn't been all that great, right? They've been groaning about food and water and and Moses has been really struggling. So he does want them to take these seriously, right? And I made a note. I suppose, and just a thought. You have Dad, right? And Dad is a guy that sometimes needs to put his foot down, right? In the family and be stern. But other times, Dad is loving and gracious, right? And he does both of those behaviors because in a perfect world, he loves his children, right? He wants to keep them safe. And you see these 10 Commandments really as God wanting to keep the nations safe from temptation and from crumbling, right? He needs to get the Savior from this nation. So, John, yeah.
Well, it just bothers me though, because why would God want them to be afraid of him? I think you were just talking about that.
Right.
I thought the fear is the fear of having trust in Jesus, not the fear of being afraid of him. I mean, we don't want our children to be afraid of Dad. We just want them to respect him, but not be afraid of him.
Right. I mean, we fear, love, and trust in God above all things, right? And that's the explanation of Luther that we say, what does fear mean? It's not scared of him unless we've done something wrong, right?
Well, that's every day.
I think it was
I want my children to be scared of traffic, right? I want them to be fearful of what could happen to them. But I wouldn't say that. I don't want them to be paralyzed by fear. Like I'm never crossing the street because I could become, a young girl like in Mozambique who passed away because she got hit by, I think it was a bus even, right? So there's a give and take with the word fear. There is definitely the respect aspect, the honor, but I think we should look at the commandments and say, if I'm a murderous person, I have to answer to a judge, right? If I steal, I have to answer to a judge, and that can be done in a very loving way, too. So, but yeah, I think we've often struggled with, fear of God. Margaret?
An awareness of his awe and a respect for his authority. His greatness is overwhelming. And I think even a small child sees the relation of size to Dad. Small children see the big kid sometimes as a bully. He's got power that I don't have, or he could overwhelm me. There had to be an awareness and acceptance of his authority. And he was the author of our lives and the author of the directions we're following. So there's that sort of fear and trembling, a respect, and appreciation for the difference between.
Right, and I think the preamble, I brought you out of slavery, speaks to that, right? No other gods,
But there was love behind it.
love behind it, right? It's not like there's no other God as strong as me. Now follow me, right? That's a totally different tone. Yeah.
What is the significance of the people's fear and them asking Moses to intercede for them?
Okay, so I'll take you down my rabbit hole for a minute. So I'm reading this lesson again, and I know what 99% of Scripture commentators will say. I mean, so God spoke these words to the people, and yet at the end of it, they have they're saying they hear lightning, thunders, and trumpets. And I'm immediately reminded of John chapter 12, 20 to 35. And if you want to you can just flip there to John chapter 12, 20 to 35. There's an instance in the New Testament where the Lord speaks to Jesus, and we know what was said there, but the people that were with Jesus said it had thundered and lightning, and it was lightning, right? So, not to read that whole section, but
Well, what were the verses?
John 12, 20 to 35. Looking at the very end there, like verses 28 and following. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it and will glorify it again. The crowd that was there and heard it said it had thundered. Others said an angel had spoken to him. Jesus said, the voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world, and so forth. So that Moses set up the boundaries around the mountain. The people could not come up on the mountain. So Moses was up on the mountain, he came down, told the people not to get close, and then physically, is Moses on the ground with the people kind of behind the yellow warning fence, hearing the Ten Commandments? Or is Moses gone back up the mountain, heard the commandments, brought them back down to the people, and now the people are... When Moses was talking to God, was it thundering and lightning up on the mountain? And they know God was talking to Moses. Right? So, again, you and I would love the Bible to just be like a timeline, right? Like he physically was here, he went there, he came back, he told them that it thundered and lightning. But the way Hebrew storytelling is, I'm not convinced that everybody's on the ground hearing these commandments as such. I think, because, I don't know, like, when they say they don't want to hear God anymore, it sounds like they're saying they don't want the lightning and the smoke and stuff anymore, right? It doesn't sound like I don't know why the commandments would have, like, caused them to be so fearful.
They knew it, they really wanted to be.
So, now, the next chapters, it's like Moses goes back up the mountain, or is still on the mountain, and he hears all the specific laws, right? So we have, I don't know, almost 10 chapters of this is what you're to do, right? And then in chapter 30, Moses comes down with the 10 Commandments on tablets. And that's where he breaks them, of course, because he sees the golden calf. So we also have this instance with Paul, right? In Paul's conversion, right? God spoke to Paul, but people did not hear God speak, but Paul did. And so I'm not going to say I understand it. I'm saying I don't fully. But it does seem a little strange to me that the Ten Commandments were given on the bottom of the mountain, then Moses went up, and the people, turned right around and made a golden calf. And then Moses came down with the tablets and then broke them because in just that, what was it? Is he on the mountain 30 or 40 days? 40 days, yeah. I think, so I think it's adiaphora. I don't think we know one way or the other. I think my explanation is more confusing, so maybe people don't bring it up. But I would not be surprised if we have a summary of the Ten Commandments that the people were given a little bit later, because I'm just not convinced that Moses came down the mountain and God spoke. Because it'd be kind of strange. God would say, "I'm going to speak with you down on the bottom of the mountain with the people, and now I don't want to talk to you all together. I want to bring you up on the mountain." Maybe he does that. But the people's reaction speaks to me that they're just hearing thunder and lightning, and we have examples of that where God does that, and even at Jesus' baptism, I think Jesus will say, "This is the voice from heaven," and you're kind of wondering what everybody else hears. So, Wayne, you have some thoughts on this, okay?
Yeah, fear is a great motivator to do good. The great seal of the American our nation is an eagle, and one claw he's holding olive branches. That's the peace and good, and the other arrows, that's war. When on my way home on the freeway or wherever I go, I don't want to pay a ticket. So my motivation for staying the speed limit is I slow down. And I think we shouldn't overanalyze it, because there's both. We always say, I was taught in school too, this fear really means respect. But I think it also means fear. Be afraid. If you do this, I know if I made my mom mad, I would be afraid, because then I would get a licking. Be afraid. But that's not the only side of God. So.
Right, and I think the same thing with worry, right? Is worry a sin? Well, worry is not a sin if you are concerned about the future, right?
Yeah, sure.
That's why you don't build your house on the sand, right? You build it on the rock, because your worried house is on the sand will crumble, right? Worry becomes a sin when you cross over to you're not trusting in God, to take care of you, right? You make your best decisions with your reason in a sinful world, but then you trust God to bless that. Back to the timing thing again. We did the same thing in Genesis 1, remember? We had the account of everybody being created, and then we went back to Adam and Eve. Some people get confused by that. They're like, well, there's two creation accounts. There's the first, and then there's chapter 1, and then there's chapter 2. It would make sense for Moses to say, here are the 10 Commandments, boom. And then he kind of pulls it back and then retells about the 40 days and all the laws he had as well. Again, I will say I'm an amateur Old Testament scholar, but I'm just not totally sold that Moses was in the cheap seats when God spoke here. Joan, thoughts?
Well, chapter 19 says that Moses and Aaron went up the mountain, and then they came back down, and God revealed.
Right, and Jesus left Capernaum and he went to Nazareth. It's maybe the chapter numeral there makes it feel like it's a different day to me, which it shouldn't. But again, we go from there is a juxtaposition there. There is physical movement. He's at A, he's at B. Now we have a discourse, right? So I hesitate to say just because the last place Moses was means he was there when the discourse happened. And again, I say that because Moses. They're like, Moses, you talk to God. I just wonder if about that, and I could be totally wrong. But just when they say there's lightning and there's thunder,
It also said in 19 that the people should not go on the mountain, so that he may have sent the lightning and the thunder to keep the people down.
yeah. I mean, is it very, very possible again that Moses is hearing the 10 Commandments on the bottom of the mountain, but the people are hearing lightning and thunder? I just make this simple point that when God talks, you can't assume everybody within 300 yards hears the same thing, right? And it just doesn't. This strikes me as that here. And true, Moses has been God's spokesperson, and Aaron has been God's spokesperson. This would be a little uncharacteristic of God to say, well, now Moses, I'm going to be the one that doesn't need you to tell them. I'm going to tell them all the 10 Commandments. That would too kind of seem a little strange to me. But again, I'm just a critical reader of the Exodus here. Not to take anything away from the inspired account, but Moses definitely wasn't interested in telling us exactly the mechanics of how the movie should play out, of where everybody was and such. I mean, they were down on the mountain. They weren't on the mountain. I know that, but yeah. All right, better questions, better thoughts. Verse 4 and 5, we talk about no idols. But hey, you have a crucifix in St. Peter, right? Schofield and Wausau campus. Should we get rid of the crucifix? What are your thoughts about that? Certainly some people take it that way, right?
As long as you're not praying to it.
It's a memorial.
It's symbol more than of what Jesus did.
So as long as you're not praying to it, as long as it's not, so it's more of a symbol. So I definitely think you have different situations, right? You have people literally looking at things made out of wood or stone, and they think that is a true God, right? And that it's listening. And we would say, no, I mean we don't venerate some object as an idol. Like they would. We're not sacrificing to somebody else.
It's better than a sticky note.
Better than a sticky note. I would think context really differentiates this, right? Plus, God doesn't have a form, right? God, you can't say I made a picture of God. He's a spirit. But in the New Testament, Jesus is a person, right? You can literally make a person, and you're not like that far off. He had hair, he had a nose, he had eyes. So I think even in context, we're working with a different type of image, aren't we? We're not trying to make an image of God who has no form. We're thanking God for Jesus and praising Jesus who does have a form. So it's apples and oranges in the New Testament to say, well, statues or idols or something of that nature, or stained glass window pictures are sinful. You're not placing your trust in them, but they actually were placing trust in their idols. So
In the funeral hymn, I don't know if it's literal or figurative or both. Hold thou thy cross before my closing eyes. Shine through the gloom and point me to the skies.
yeah,
That's something I would want to see.
yeah. I mean, the Old Testament, what did they have? They had put these words on your wrist and on your forehead, on your doorposts. I think, we do this with symbols. Also speak to that, right? Could the tabernacle have had an image of the ark? We don't see that in the temple necessarily, but we do have. We have angels that are on the Ark of the Covenant, right? I guess someone could have complained about that. Like, isn't that worshiping images? You're praying at this place where there's golden angels. I just thought of that, by the way. Yeah.
Well, God gave them something to look at too. He gave them the pillar of cloud. He gave them the pillar of fire. There was a place for them to focus their minds, their thoughts, their eyes.
Yeah.
A symbol of leadership. He was their leader. He directed their footsteps, and those were things they could see. He provided those visual cues, if you will.
In the altars of the Old Testament, they always had the lambs, the things that they offered up too. Whereas Jesus on the cross is our reminder that Jesus is the sacrifice for us. Once if we don't
Okay,
need
so
to
you
bring
could
the
you could have
lambs.
made the case that before there was a crucifix, God was giving people lambs on altars to worship toward and be thankful for, right? Yeah, that's very interesting. We talked about love and hate, kind of talking about obeying and not obeying. We talked about generations. Talk maybe a second about murder. Short verse. You shall not murder. I liked how the People's Bible talked about premeditated murder. Here is the thought. It's not, And then I remind you that there's like cities of refuge, right? Like if you accidentally killed your neighbor, you could find these cities of refuge, right? And you were safe there. And so we want to be careful, who we call murderers. A soldier on the battlefield is not a premeditated, murderer.
Capital punishment.
And things of that nature. So capital punishment should be for those who are thought about it, planned it, would do it again. Maybe even if they wouldn't do it again, they've done it and need to pay the penalty for it. So 17, talking about the desire of coveting. So if you want a nicer car or nicer scooter, what is this coveting? Well, I think we'd have to say, coveting is something that God is definitely not giving you, right? So God is definitely not giving you your neighbor's property until He sells it to you. The Lord is not giving you your neighbor's wife until maybe he dies and your spouse dies, and then you have a relationship, right? So coveting, it's okay. It's it was okay for Abraham to want his own land, right, and to want to have children. He wasn't coveting those things. Those were blessings he could assume or look forward to. So this is not a bad thing to progress, so to speak, right? But when it's not given to you and no expectations of it, then it's sinful. Sabbath day, we don't keep it on Saturday. Maybe just make one last note about that. Jesus said in Mark chapter 2, He is the Lord of the Sabbath, right? And what did that mean? Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. He was the one who gives rest, right? Eternal rest. And so that commandment specifically pointed forward to Jesus. And now that Jesus has come, there's a new reality, right? And the apostles talked about that. You could look up Colossians 2, where the apostle Paul says, don't let anybody judge you by any new moon or festival or Sabbath day, for the old things have passed and a new reality has come. So that is the I would say the one law that really had to do with worship that Jesus amended, and he was free to do so. I think certainly it's different than the other laws, but it needs to be there. I mean, it really needs to be with these commands at this time, even if it trips up the Jews later in life. So those are 10 commandments. Any last comments or thoughts? Certainly you can stump the preacher next time. As we'll continue on with chapter 21.
Thank you.
Let us close with a brief prayer, and God's word is our great heritage. So, Heavenly Father, we thank you for the commands you gave the Israelites. Certainly commands we we still know and cherish today, for they protect so much, be it spiritual with our relationship with you, and or physical and relational with each other. When these commandments have been shared and followed, your people have always been blessed. Now, Lord, hear us as we join our hearts in praise. God's word is our great heritage, and shall be ours forever, to spread its light from age to age, shall be our chief endeavor. Through life it guides our way, in death it is our stay. Lord, grant while worlds endure, we keep its teachings pure throughout all generations.